Thank you all for being here today. It is always a pleasure to share my research with these wonderful people. So today I will show two different approaches to the very broad notion of multimodality, specifically trying to see how multimodality is differently conceptualized in sociosemiotic terms, so the tradition in thing we are all familiar with, and multimodality in computational terms. Then I'll present a case study that is a study of hateful memes, because with my research team at the beginning, when we started to work with computational models to see how we could somehow bridge the gap between these different conceptualization in multimodality, we found that memes were ideal test beds to analyze image-text relationship, basic image-text relation. It seemed easy at the very beginning, but in fact they are very complex multimodal parts. I'll present two data sets and give you some examples of these two data sets. The first is the Hateful Memes Challenge data set that was developed by the Facebook AI Research Group in 2020. And another one, this is the one that I collected. It is about misogyny, hate against women, with particular reference to body shaming and more specifically fat shaming. It is a very small data set at the moment, but I'm trying to get it grow, especially because I'm interested in several languages, so not just on English memes, but also on other languages I'm more familiar with. Then I'll discuss these examples and present preliminary findings and future directions. So what does this text mean? How do you deal with these forms of a decontextualized language? We can pragmatically infer the meaning and understand that this text has to do with our mobile phones, but this would be considered like an ungrammatical formation because you don't have the main verb here. And this is not very easy to understand because this is, of course, completely decontextualized. But if you add a bit of additional information, our brain starts processing, trying to put together the textual and the visual components. Visual component is equally decontextualized, and we start thinking that putting the two together, you understand what's going on here. So the process of making meanings of the meme is straightforward. However, what the human mind can do effortlessly and automatically, I would say, is very complex for machines to do. Process is what I call meaning making. And I would like to show today the productivity of models that recognize that meaning making goes beyond language alone models, and that meanings are not additive as computational models usually them out, and that these models are these meanings are multiplicative, so not addition but multiplication. So meaning is not the sum of its parts. Meanings are something much more complex. And visual verbal combinations in memes are not always playful, unfortunately. They can trigger hate, incite violence, and disseminate hatred. So visual verbal combinations are very pervasive today and influence, at least in Europe and in the United States. So this may vary in different countries, in different geographical areas, of course, but they influence the way in which we view things in the world and how we interpret things, behavior, texts, and so I conceptualize the multimodality as the study of meaning making informed by Halliday's theory of social semiotics. And meaning making in this context is co-constructed and can be understood as a social process and can be understood by interpreting how the different semiotic resources are organized and produce meanings in combination, according to what is usually called grammars, that is the system of regularity. So people should share how these meanings are produced in social contexts in specific times and places to make regular meaning of them. So language within this approach, and this is something that is very useful in the context of language learned AI-driven models, because this is rather understudied. It is completely understudied in the context of computational models. Language is only one resource. So the idea here, the important idea here, is that language shouldn't be prioritized. Language shouldn't be considered as the leading source in communication. Examples of resources, and here, of course, I take from the press examples: speech, still image, image, gesture, music, video models, action, color. I like very much this list, let's say, of examples, because it doesn't conceptualize language as one unique resource, but it distinguishes between speech and writing as two separate. So semiotic and multimodal approaches to communication have addressed the question of how to, as I was initially claimed by Kress and Van Leeuwen, how to read texts and images in their combination and in their meaning making. Machine learning is making great strides in addressing problems in the interpretation of text-image combinations. Think of natural language processing and image recognition. However, most of these models work with one modality at a time, such as a text alone or image alone, thus often failing to successfully interpret multimodal data. It is including more than one resource. And this is, of course, very, very common, especially in digital scenarios. So multimodal deep learning, so you see here the use of multimodality, but in a different context, integrate information from several modalities. So these are called modalities in computational models because they are not conceptualized as resources, but as basically channels that is theoretically very different, by including some neural networks, and each neural network is specialized in analyzing one specific modality. And again, typically the language modality. They are much more trained by this. The output of these networks is then combined using fusion techniques to produce a unified representation of the data. Fusion, the key concept, is the combination of several modalities to make decisions or predictions. So in this case, another key word to understand how this very, I'm sorry I'm being very banal, but this is just to try to give like fundamental and basic understanding of these two different conceptualizations of multimodality. So in computational models, the key issue is decisions and predictions. So it's not a lot about interpretation, because interpretation, of course, implies like agency of some kind, whereas this kind of approach is more about statistical probability. So these models try to replicate what the prodigious human mind does automatically and effortlessly, as I was saying a couple of minutes ago, that is interpreting multimodalities at the same time. So we interpret these multimodal data all at once with no specific overload of cognitive effort. Computational and multimodal fusion architectures, in other words, like these systems to interpret multimodal data, include unimodal neural networks working as encoders of individual modalities, typically one for each modality. The first stage, you see here, this would be, for example, language, image, and music or sound. Then a fusion network comes in the model that during the encoding process combines the features extracted from each input modality. So basically they put these things together, these neural networks together. And then there's a classifier that processes the fused data and makes predictions accordingly. So prediction is the last stage of a process where all these interpretations or these somehow predictions are made separately. What we have called a TIC, that is a text image cluster, for example, a meme, as I was saying, can be inferentially interpreted by users. So we need some different skills to interpret a text image cluster. So how can the text image is automatically interpreted? So the question here is automatic interpretation. So the main issues here is the complex interplay between text and image, and I'll give you some examples about these. The interplay between text image combinations or clusters and context, because as you may well imagine, so these different combinations may be received very differently in different cultures and even in different groups of people. And how these are interpreted and resemiotised, because a typical feature of memes and also of other multimodal artifacts, for example, TikTok Reels, they are continuously resemiotized. For example, with TikTok Reels, like the so-called duets, or remixing and refashioning the kind of multimodal that is being that has been produced in the first place. Research has focused so far on the teaching and learning of critical literacies to humans. So this is something that is, if you wish, like very banal. It is, of course, it is about teaching humans. So this is like the basic and very well-established assumption here. But we were also wondering if it is of use to teach critical, critical, the form of critical, that is interpretative digital literacies to machines as well. So work towards reaching this very ambitious goal, that is giving some sort of additional skills to machines. So this is a key point to our research. So you may wonder now why we should care for prevention. It is automatic detection of hate speech is very important for a number of reasons. If you think like suicide prevention, mass shooting prediction, and more generally, the promotion of physical and psychological well-being of people. In the case of fat shaming, this is an issue that's been threatening the well-being of and the sense of self-worth of women. And intervention, and I don't know what this green line is over there. Okay. Intervention that is broaden our vision of literacies. So literacies shouldn't be like genes, shouldn't be just considered as ethical issues. This is something a bit more complex, actually. And as far as I'm aware, there's a lot going on in terms of debates about how teachers should harness and use and monitor and guide the use of these tools, but there's not as much research as it should be in terms of how we can just somehow guide a direction, guide development of more sensitive models in the context of education. The caveat to this model is that actually boundaries between what is satirical, social commentary, or political critique and what is hateful may be very thin. And then again, these could vary a lot across different countries. So when I present my examples, these are very differently perceived by people because some people say, oh, but this is just funny. This is not offensive. This is not harmful. Whereas other people found this very triggering, very problematic. So it depends on cultures, but also on personal sensitivity. For example, across different genders. Okay. Maybe a realistic compromise is to find agreed on boundaries between freedom of speech and censorship of hateful contents that are dangerous to people and communities. In other words, an idea could be to refer to national laws and understand what is sanctioned in a specific cultural context should be just pulled down from the net. So trying to develop models that can be somehow customized to different communities and to different legal systems. So memes are, as I was saying a couple of minutes ago, memes are were defined by Dawkins as the cultural parallel to biological genes and consider them as being in control of their own reproduction and thus serving their own ends. And Rogers extended on this view and said that they carry information, are replicated and are transmitted from one person to another, and they may have the ability to evolve, mutating at random. This means that something that is harmless in the beginning may become very dangerous in the process of resemiotisation. I think of the very famous case of Pip the Frog. Have you ever heard of Pip the Frog? Yes, it was like a very serious issue in the States. And undergoing natural selection. So in this sense, memes are powerful tools for the dissemination of hateful contents. So here we basically found two coexisting features. The first, basic text-image combinations, especially if you think of image macros. Second, very dangerous, so a social issue. So we combine these two different interests, and that was very important for us to address. So let's see how Keela, who was the leader of the Facebook AI research team, who first addressed this problem. It's pretty recent, 2020, but in the last 4 years, a lot has changed. So he and his research team view the problem in the following terms. In order for AI to become a more effective tool for detecting hate speech, it must be able to understand content the way people do holistically. When viewing a meme, for example, we don't think about the words and photo independently of each other. We understand the combined meaning together. This is extremely challenging for machines, however, because it means they can just analyze the text and the image separately. I think that this claim here is very relevant to what multimodal researchers are doing. So I think that this specific claim aligns with our, sorry if I say our, way of conceptualizing multimodality. So the notion of being holistic and considering the interplay between text and image and piece. Semiotic, or as a multimodal analyst, I see semiotic resources as going beyond the language. So, and I'm interested in see how semiotic resources combine to make meanings. I think that in this context, it is very important to apply multimodal critical discourse studies to allow more fine-grained, context-sensitive, language-sensitive, and other resource-sensitive analysis. That is like combining the different approaches to different resources, not just considering the other resources as deriving necessarily from language, also because you see a lot of memes with no language whatsoever. And I also draw on Bouvier and Rasmussen qualitative research using social media. And I also applied my own research in the difference between hate and fear speech. So hate may be more explicit. No, hate actually is explicit, whereas the fear speech that is much more frequent because it can be somehow censored, somehow instill the fear towards different people, different in terms of race, gender, or religion. So the idea that is that people different from us should be feared and not accepted. So within this model, we conceptualize hate speech as not like a black and white phenomenon, but we think that this could be interpreted as along a spectrum. So this somehow goes against current AI modeling systems, because current AI modeling systems are just binary. Hateful, non-hateful. That's the kind of thing they do. Whereas hate is much more nuanced, and it is a very complex phenomenon. So the data sets, I'm going to quickly present my data sets. The hateful memes challenge, as I was saying, was an online competition to increase research on how to train machines to detect harmful contents. And the data sets that was developed to this end includes 10,000 memes, and these memes have been made up, so they are not real memes. They've been designed using licensed images from Getty, and the data sets was built to avoid false positive images. Then there's this bigger data set that was that's been developed by Chiara Polli, who is a research assistant working with me, with a sample of 2,000 manually collected memes. So these are user-generated memes. And in my presentation today, I'm using a larger sample of 300 memes. So it is a very small data set collected on the topic of both manually and qualitatively collecting on the topic of body shaming, and in very general terms, sexism or stereotyping against women. They are made up memes. Whereas the second two sets are user-generated, like real memes. Let's see how to train machines. So this is a system developed in the context of the Hateful Memes Challenge. So you see here a set of harmless images. Okay? And 3 sets of harmless texts. The way you spell today, your wrinkle cream is working great. Look how many people love you, so harmless. No kind of like dangerous or mean meaning. But if you combine them, the meaning becomes mean. You see here a first, I would say, pretty powerful explanation of how this interaction can be actually non-understandable if you consider the 2 resources independently from each other. If you swap in different images, the meaning becomes harmless again. So changing the mix of text and images can create what has been defined as benign confounders to test classification systems and help them learn. So this data set included a lot of benign confounders to help machine understand the difference of what is harmful and what is not. That is, this is something that we always do when we teach. So helping students to understand what is good and what is bad in terms, for example, of multimodal composition. So giving like positive examples or showing something that is not that useful in the context of communication. This data set included different types of vulnerable categories and related forms of aid, like disability, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and ethnicity, and include different types of attacks, inciting violence and portraying certain groups of people as criminals or terrorists, and dehumanizing these groups of. But here, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that this, in many cases, these categories or these forms of hate and attack are often interlaced. So it's not always easy to understand which form of attack and which group of people are the target. So in this case here, you see same image and different texts. Diverse group of women. You see an unproblematic text, unproblematic. The result is a harmless message. So this is an example of a benign confounder. You see here, same image, but different text. Yellow, black, red, and normal. So here, the text may be unproblematic, even though the word normal would be most likely flagged as problematic by AI systems. Unproblematic image, the same image, but here the message is harmful because it suggests that different, let's say, colors are inferior to the white color. So here it is somehow delivering a racist message. In the second example, you see reversed roles. So same text and different images. The first example, when your dishwasher is broken, so you take it back to Walmart to get a new one. So this is unproblematic text and image. The resulting meaning is harmless. Second example, you have the same text, but a different image is inserted here that is unproblematic per se, but if text and image are read in combination, this is of course problematic because it hints at like the domestic value of a woman that is used as as an electronic equipment. So here the woman is objectified and made like useless and or useful only to serve like marital interests. Analyzing verbal or visual components in isolation does not help understand the overall meaning. And the combination of verbal plus visual triggers meanings and association that are not summative, but multiplicative. And this is something that we have learned from Lemke. I think that this is very, very relevant to discussions and debates that are currently being developed in the context of computational models. So some part of background knowledge is also needed to understand the harmful content, what can be called like knowledge of the world. Let's see here, same image, but different texts. Here, there's one problematic word, Nazi, Anne Frank hid from the Nazis for 2 years. So this is Anne Frank, the famous German young lady who was writing a diary and hid from the Nazis, and then in the end she was put in a concentration camp where she died when she was like 16 years old. So this is a very famous icon of the Nazi hate. But here the message is harmless because this is a benign confounder developed by the Facebook AI group. But this is interesting because this meme here would be considered as hateful because of the word Nazi. So that would be flagged by AI systems. Whereas this second example here with unproblematic text, the same image, of course, it is harmful, problematic. Is your girlfriend hot like me? So here the implication is that Anne Frank is non-attractive. And this is like, there's a double layer of hate, because it is a hate against a victim, one of the victims of the Holocaust, also as a young lady who is like vilified and made a target of misogynistic attack. But this wouldn't be flagged by AI systems because there are no obvious dangerous or harmful or problematic contents. So one lexical item can make AI classify the meme as hateful when this is not the case. Analyzing only the verbal component does not help identify harmful context. And then again, deeper knowledge is needed to understand harmful content. In this example here, you see different images, different texts, but same topic. So that it is narrated a story in semantic terms. It is about running. Okay, so this has like people running. Running is one of the best ways to stay fit. So here, harmless image. Second example, things I love to hunt. So here, unproblematic text, at least if you think that hunting is ethical. Unproblematic image, but here, of course, the message is harmful because it suggests that women be hunted by people, also victims. So you see here like a form of attack against her being a woman, against her being a Black woman. So here you have like the rhetoric, the racist rhetoric against people of color, specifically if they are women. So this example tells us that even if the combination of verbal and visual images seems to produce similar representations, first case verbally talking about running and visually people who are running, the actual interplay for verbal and visual produces very different meanings. Understanding means drawing on a wide repertoire of different sets of knowledge. So now let's turn to user-generated memes, and then I would really like to hear your opinions, your ideas, especially if you think that these are hateful or not. Then again, this is like the first time I'm showing this example, so I would be very much interested to know what you think. So this first example, you see unproblematic text and mixed problematic images. Message to me is harmful. So this is come l'hai capito che sono del Sud. How did you understand that I'm from the South? This is an Italian kind of combination, a mixture of images and text. So interpretation informed by sociosemiotics that there's a complex reading pathway like this one, going like zigzagging or going from top to bottom. There's stereotype representation of Southern Italian women. In the first cluster, you have come l'hai capito che sono del Sud. This is the key to interpret the images. Without the text, it would be a bit more problematic. And this is an concetto esposito with like a typical Southern name associated with ideas of backwardness, because it is like something like old style, like an old style or a rural kind of naming. So this would be understood in an Italian context as stereotyping. And then you have other stereotypes. That is a bird lady, because Southern Italian women are considered to be like a bit like beasts and not being able to take care of themselves. So backward, again another form of stereotyping. And women with many children in the second, in the left bottom image, which is, of course, is not negative per se, but here it contributes to feed the rhetoric of being again. Then an overweight woman. Here's another example with unproblematic text, unproblematic image, but that would be considered, I don't know how would you consider this, if problematic or not? That you tell me later on. But I'm pretty sure that in Italy that would be considered as offensive immediately. The jobs that Italians don't want to do anymore. So here, there's an example of fat shaming and vilification of women coming as the result of the combination of text and image, i lavori che gli italiani non vogliono più fare. But here you need cultural and pragmatic knowledge of the Italian context that feeds on the rhetoric portraying Italians as idle and unwilling to do menial jobs. So Italians don't want to work, basically. So this is like a common stereotype. African people as hustlers, willing to do anything for a living, and also as a people who are willing to steal the jobs that Italians don't want to do. So there's like this paradoxical kind of attitude that is like, we don't want to do some menial jobs, but we don't want African people stealing our jobs. So there's this sort of ambiguity. Then women are here considered as sex exploiters, because this lady here seems to be somehow forcing herself to the guy. So this is like then again a bit of a problematic representation. These two examples, okay, so these two examples are not Italian. The left one is Spanish, and the second one is Brazilian Portuguese. So the translation here, when the person who assembled you lost the instructions. So here, the problem is that this woman here is considered as, again, an object. And when the person assembled you, it implies the idea that this woman is somehow wrong. Because it suggests like here, unrealistic, strange, unattractive body proportions. Okay, so there's rhetoric at work here. In the second case, I'm going to the E and EM stop, leaving the competitors destabilized with my sensuality. So here you see a kind of like cultural reference. So if you don't know what it is, what E and EM is, you can understand where this lady is going, basically. So you need context to understand. It is also a suggestion that she's not sensual, she's not sexy, she's not hot. So this is a sort of, again, vilifying, disparaging humor. It's like making fun of these. This is another example that I would like straightforwardly define as body shame. I find this example pretty interesting because you have the same image, but two different languages. So this is interesting to me to understand how different language make sense or make meanings out of the same visual image. In the first case, we have inventa vestido levanta ponta, that is buttock lifting dress on sale, making fun of the lady's back that is associated to buttocks. So again, some form of disparagement humor that builds on these strange or unrealistic body proportions. And in the second case, this is German. Finally, a woman who gets her ass up is, there's like a literal meaning, because this is like lifting her buttocks. This is a literal, but there's also a metaphorical meaning because this in German is like a person who is very proactive, who is very active. So getting her ass up would mean also like being very active or very involved in doing things or in getting things done very quickly. These is other examples, always, again, making fun of body proportions. When you wake up with your ass turned, like in a bad mood, this is a Brazilian, Portuguese, and this is German. That's what happens when you turn around too quickly. And this is, again, using the same image in different cultural contexts. So it may suggest that people find these images like funny or useful to make fun of against women, and re-semiotize using different languages differently. This example is a harmless image. In fact, you see like this like beautiful lady and but harmful text. Meglio un filo di cellulite che un manico di scopa. Se volete toccare le ossa, andate a fare I guardiani al cimitero. So fat shaming has a correspondence with thin shaming. So these are the two sides of the coin. So it seems that when it comes to female beauty, worthiness is always out of reach. And the post is introduced with buongiorno here, good morning. In Italy is associated with digital illiteracy. So putting buongiorno as like the caption of any kind of context, good morning, is considered to be something that people who are not literate in digitality would do. I don't know if this is the case in Singapore or in China, no? So being thin within this rhetoric, but this is pretty common in Europe, not just in Italy. Being thin is associated with being dead. Again, so I'll skip this examples because I think I'm running out of time. I would like to show you these examples because there are images with no text. So do you think you can understand this? First example, second example. Portrait lady is Ellie Schlein, who is the secretary of the Italian Democratic Party, like the leftist party, and member of the Chamber's deputies. And she's been the target of body shaming since her election back in at the beginning of like 23. And here is, in this first example, she's visually compared to Marilyn Manson. So we understand that this is not like a flattering comparison. This may be associated to like her being sexually non-binary, or this may be associated to being like somehow scary because she's considered to be very ugly, and she's been attacked on the grounds of being ugly in Italy. And in the second meme, one here, Ellie Schlein is ridiculed as being compared to a famous comedian, Pippo Franco, and Pippo Franco just made his career on the idea of exploiting his ugliness. And here you see his face superimposed. This is Ellie Schlein, and you can recognize Ellie Schlein by the fact that this is like the Democratic Party official T-shirt. And here you see the signature hairstyle she wears. So this is, I would say, very complex for non-Italian, for example, very close countries like Switzerland or Spain, they would not understand this kind of irony. This is another example that I'm interested in terms of different uses of language varieties. So the background knowledge here is that she may impersonate Luxuria, who is a very famous Italian, very feminized trans activist. And here this text, volevo fare Luxuria, ma troppe esime dicono. They wanted to do Luxuria, but she has two big boobs, they say. So this is like using or mixing Italian and Roman. This is another layer of complexity, and with a lot of colloquialism, like use of Roman dialect, fa instead of fare. And then you have a vulgar Roman slang, zinne, and irregular syntax. In the reported speech with missing inverted commas. So this is like a last example that I would like to show. So this meme started circulated in 2015 in the aftermath of some far-right movement protest that were pretty strong in Germany. And here, Bundeskanzlerin, federal chancellor, was turned into Bundesmerkel. So this is how people called her, Bundesmerkel, like federal Merkel. She was the German prime minister back then. Here, modified as Bundesmerkel. It's up to the viewer to add here an M, an F in place of the question mark and complete the means action. So fertile means female piglet, which implies an untidy, unclean person, especially an unclean female person with different connotations from those activated by Schwein and Sau. Okay, so this is another specific kind of word, and here, of course, the activated meaning making would be with Piglet rather than with Merkel as a prime minister, because you see her like her connotation, her facial expressions, and her face turned into basically a piglet. So the activated message would be like she's a Ferkel. It's a similar model with explicit mention of Ferkel. So here it is explicitly mentioned. The word Ferkel is disambiguates the reference, and this implied meaning of an unclear, dirty person is made salient, even more salient by means of this like meaning-making device here, the red circle that highlights the Anderos rate stain. So going very quickly to my conclusions with this table, I just wanted to show you some of the possible categorizations that may be used as input to this model, to AI models for the automatic interpretation of text images, like putting the text, if it is problematic or unproblematic, the image, language used, the resulting message, level of contextual knowledge. That is, in other words, if you immediately understand, or if there's a sort of agreement between people or among people from different cultures, if the reference is hateful immediately or not, or if it is perceived differently by different people. And this is confidence score that I left purposely blank. This is something that is currently used by AI models when they interpret these textual visual combinations. They in their output, they say how confident they are. So here, an interesting activity could be if we just together we put like a confidence score about the harmless or harmful message, would this be the same for all of us, or would it vary to some degree? And here localized localized means, and as you can see here, the text is missing, and this may be even more complex, more difficult to understand level of contextual knowledge. I was a bit unsure of the kind of level of contextual knowledge needed to understand. So here, my assumption would be that the confidence score would be even lower. In terms of preliminary findings, these text-image combinations have many different configurations, and meanings can be interpreted in isolation. So I hope I made a case about the need to see and to interpret these combinations. Meanings are multiplicative, and we perhaps need to broaden our view of critical digital literacy. So if we assume that in the next 2 to 5 years, the use of AI models for learning will be more and more frequent, so how should we teach machines? So can we do basically to somehow help increase the confidence of these models? How should we pursue a line of research that somehow manages to input more cultural and contextual knowledge? So semiotically informed multimodal studies, in my opinion at least, can help direct attention to domains such as intratextual and intertextual context, languaging within the same or other languages, how the mix of different languages impact on the overall meaning, pragmatic inferences, and intercultural understanding and interpretations. So in the future, we are working to create categories that go beyond binary systems like hateful, non-hateful. So creating more ways of different taxonomies that can be understood by machines, and then using multimodal critical discourse analysis to fine-tune error analysis in computational linguistics. That is basically these models at the moment only decide if the interpretation is correct or not after producing the input. We are working to change this state of affairs and develop models for more fine-grained systems of learning in social media platforms and digital environments beyond the binary classification. We also think that it's important to reflect on the sets of interpretative digital skills a machine should have and which signs of learning are the expected outcome for machines, not just for people. So I think this is something that we are already late, actually. And encourage dialogue among computer scientists, computational linguists, and multimodal discourse analysts, educators. I would also say language planners, semioticians, sociolinguistics, and practices. Thank you.